Welcome to You Can't Laugh at Work, the podcast where we take topics you can't laugh at and we find ways to laugh at them in the never-ending quest to prove that work can be funny. Yeah, that thing that we spend 70% of our waking hours thinking about doing, stressing about, talking about, and so on. We should be able to laugh at it. It takes up a majority of our life in our headspace, so we might as well be able to cope with it in a healthy way that brings joy, improves our experience, improves our performance, improves our connection with other people, improves our communication, and so on. So in this podcast, I'll be speaking to leaders, executives, CHROs, business owners, who have exemplified the idea that humor is not only welcome in the workplace, but it's necessary. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with the CHRO of Paycor, a company that builds HR software for other organizations. Crone has been the Chief Human Resources Officer at Paycor since 2010. And since then, Paycor has grown from 430 people to 2,000. While maintaining a positive culture across an expanding geographic footprint. And in this episode, Karen is going to explain how they have built this culture, the way that they are future-focused, and the way that they embrace change, embrace connecting with one another, and embrace the idea of letting the frontline employees guide the leaders rather than the top-down approach, which seems to lead to disengagement, the feeling of not being appreciated, the feeling of not being recognized, unhappiness, lethargy. I mean, we don't need people in the middle of a pandemic feeling unappreciated. If they're continuing to make your organization money, we have to make them feel welcome. We have to make them feel excited to do what they're doing. And Karen exemplifies this. Under Karen's leadership, the HR function is considered a trusted advisor and is deeply embedded in Paycor's lines of business as drivers of hiring, talent development, retention, and engagement strategies. Yeah, HR has a seat at the table. Not only that, but they're listened to, and Karen's leadership has a lot to do with that. So sit back and enjoy this episode of You Can't Laugh at That's You Can't Laugh at Work series with Karen Crone. I love your narrative. You know, you talk a lot about the future of work and adapting the workplace to be more human in the face of these future AI and automation and working remotely and things like that. And so that's what inspired me to reach out to you. Also, I've in working with a lot of SHRM chapters, I've met a lot of people who work for Paycor, and they have nothing but good things to say about working there. And I think that's a testament. So I did a little research and found, a few of your articles, and that's what led me to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So are you often a keynote speaker, or how do you engage with companies and with SHRM?
Yeah, I'm a keynote first and foremost, but I've been diving into doing workshops and consulting as far as leaders trying to find new ways to use humor in the workplace. And that's like my whole thing is kind of clearing up the misconception of what it means to use humor. Humor isn't necessarily just about getting laughs. I mean, that's one byproduct of it, but it's more thinking creatively and finding new ways to do old things and finding ways to connect the unfortunate circumstances that we face with an opportunity to create something. And right. I use the analogy of leadership is like performing stand-up comedy. You're going to try some things, they're not going to work, but when you do make a connection with your audience, which is your team, it's more rewarding than anything that's out there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good analogy. Very good. Yeah,
so
I think that's one of the things with my team is we try and keep it light. We have a lot of our own little tribal jokes and tribal humor, and it is what gets you through the highs and the lows for sure.
Right. It creates that connection, especially something like this. Like, we're all going through this together, and I'm working with a group right now that just doesn't understand that yet. And,
Yeah.
they're still pontificating from the corporate office and not really communicating with their managers. And that's why, what I really appreciate what you're doing, which is you turned it over to your team to kind of come back to you and communicate with you, and you guys are visible, and that's awesome.
They always say that you learn the most in the extremes, extremely good times and extremely bad times. And I think those extremes create these inflection points where you really change, right? Like all of the change that we've undergone as corporate America over the last 12 years is probably a decade worth of change if we had just let it come in a natural sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole notion of being able to flex your entire workforce to working from home, when we think about, how many obstacles and hurdles were in front of that, just 12 months ago, like, oh, will they be productive? And oh, will they be, really focused on work? And oh, what if they have children in the workplace or pets or whatever? And now all those things are just like gone, right? We've had to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a real inflection point.
I kind of want to dive into, because HR is a field that is pretty set in the way things are, slow to change. It involves so much paperwork, and I understand that. But you seem to have separated yourself from the pack, so to speak. Your perspective of change, when you hear change, what comes to your mind?
My team has always tried to live in tomorrow a little bit, right? Live in the future, because that's what allows you to shed the things that are unnecessary, right? If you can envision the future and stand in the future and think about what the employee will need, what the manager will need, it allows you to make better choices and better prioritization about things that you can stop doing, which is really the inflection of change, right? Change is about stopping the things that you're doing today and picking up new things or taking new approaches. And sometimes it's hard to do that when you're carrying a pail around of the old and the new, right? You have to figure out how to set the pail down. For me, the success for my team has really been about that, standing in the future, imagining what it's going to take to scale the business in the future. And for a high growth technology company like Paycor, we go through inflection points of growth, rapid growth. And so you have to stay ahead. And if you don't stay ahead, you're just disempowering the business. You're limiting or hampering the business. So, David, one of the things I'm really thinking about today in the way of change is this notion that the employee experience today is the four walls of their home office, right? So how do you reach into that home office and, dip a little bit of the company onto the person or into that room? And how do you make the big small? So like if you're a new employee joining Paycor and we have 2,000 employees, how do you connect them to something that was so easy to do when you could be physically present and they could see things in the building and they could interact with people in the stairwell and, see them in the lunchroom and all those things? Like, how do you create that same energy that allows people to connect? And so one of the changes that we're really thinking through is how do you make the big small, and how do you really create more energy in the four walls of that home office, the cultural energy. And so that's kind of one of the changes that we're grappling with right now, in terms of the current state of, work from home and the pandemic, because it's not going to go away. This is it, right? We've rewritten the rules of work and they're working from home.
In your piece in Forbes that I referenced when I reached out to you initially, you mentioned like breakouts or like virtual conversation. Do you allow like team members, because that's one of my favorite things, because I've been doing a ton of webinars and it's overwhelming when there's hundreds and hundreds of people, but when we break out into like smaller rooms and have human conversations where the prompt is something silly, like what have you been binging on Netflix? It creates sort of a low stakes but also focused approach. Have you incorporated things like that?
Yeah, we're doing a couple of things like that. So number one, we do something called Coffee Chat. And so we have this app that was provided by a company, Tier 1 Performance Solution, that randomizes connections in the business. So you and I could randomly get connected for like a 30-minute conversation. And the conversation is super informal, as if we sat down at Starbucks, right? And because we're new to each other, it tends to circle around, your family, your home, the light stuff, the
Yeah.
stuff that people bond over and connect over. The other thing we do is my team used to do this huddle every day, and part of the huddle sometimes was, what was your first car, or what was your who was your first prom date or something, or who was your prom date or something like that. And it invariably leads to like these hilarious conversations about your experience growing up, or your circumstances at a certain point of time. And I think those things are really important, David, like being able to bond over the human condition, because we've all had that first job, that first car, that first date, that first whatever, pet. And it does allow lightness to come into work.
Yeah.
So, and we're doing that in breakouts too. We'll do Zoom breakouts where we might, have a lighthearted conversation about, any topic, pick a topic before we dive right into the content. Because I think when you make those little human connections, it creates trust.
Absolutely. And it breaks down those silos too. So you're not seeing one another as your job descriptions. You're, now all of a sudden we're making this connection about this thing we've all went through. That's a great point.
Or hierarchy.
Yeah.
It takes away the hierarchy.
Oh, for sure. That's one thing that actually I just released this episode of the podcast yesterday with Rich Sheridan at Menlo. They do like a huddle at the beginning of the shift as well. They call it their stand-up meeting, where the whole team, it's like 20 some people, they just stand in a big circle and they pass around. Well, they don't do this. Well, they do it virtually now, but they, when they were in person, they would pass around this horned Viking helmet. And whoever has the helmet can share what they're going through, what they're like, what they're doing, what project they're working on, something silly that happened to them, whatever. And they keep it light. And it creates just an instant connection between people, and it's so cool. And I've read a lot about having chance encounters and like setting your people up to have chance encounters in the workplace so that they are constantly meeting new people and creating new connections. And it sounds like you're doing that virtually, which is super cool.
Yeah, David, the thing I'm exploring and my team is like resisting right now is I have this kind of notion about how can you create like homerooms or houses? So remember, like when we're in high school, we go to homeroom right in the morning to check in, and you're in there with the same 30 people. And, over the 4 years of your high school, you kind of get to know them, and you may not be friends with them, but there's still like this little camaraderie of being part of something together.
Yeah.
And so I keep trying to think of like, how do you make the big small? So could you create the concept of kind of homerooms where you have tenured people and new people, and you have, people from all different functions, and they're really responsible for helping people on board. They're really responsible for being the first line of questions when somebody doesn't want to go to their manager, or, they're the person that's sharing the norms, or they're the person that's, talking up an employee at a company event, like, oh gosh, we're doing this fireside chat for our Colorful Connections ERG, and this is what it's about, and you should come, right? Like it's this kind of welcoming environment or connected environment that allows new people to bond, but also existing people, like tenured people, to share all the traditions and norms and practices that make your company come alive. And so I haven't cracked the code with my team yet, but I'm not giving up the ghost.
I support it.
There's upsides and downsides to it, but for me, it's like, how do you mix your tenured people and your multidisciplinary people together so that, you're not just with your own function all the time. You're not just with the people that you work closest to all the time. You're getting connections and interactions with leadership from other parts of your business. So I don't know, it's a pipe dream. I'll keep cracking it, but that's kind of what the thing I'm noodling about right now. And it goes back to that notion of how you make the big small.
You can't laugh at that.
You Can't Laugh at That is brought to you by Water Cooler Comedy. Now, for too long, we've been asking the question, should work be focused on work or fun? But Mark Twain once said that work and play are two words used to describe the same thing under different circumstances. So my point is that we're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, should work be work or fun. The question should be, how can we make work fun? Whether it's a keynote speech, a half-day workshop, a 90-day consulting program, a customized corporate comedy experience for you and your team as you try to figure out how to reboard, how to get back to work after working virtually for a year. Why humor in the workplace? Well, studies have shown that humor builds resilience. It allows us to adapt to problems more quickly, more creatively, and more It allows us to adapt to problems more quickly, more creatively, and more I can't say collaboratively. It allows us to adapt to not being able to say collaboratively correctly. Because not only does laughter make us feel better, it makes us work better too. So why not make work the time and place to laugh? Check out watercoolercomedy.org. It seems as though the people with whom you work are pretty forward-thinking themselves. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no, I'm super lucky, David, in that the team I work with is exceptionally talented, and they are very deep and very experienced. And so that's part of what allows us to live in the future, is that they've got such a good command over, the expectations of the function that they can experiment and try different things. And I think, that's what's led us to do things like, really change our performance management system, or really think differently about talent review and development. And of course, now the thing that we're really focused on is diversity, equity, and inclusion, like how we really weave those practices into everything we do. And so, you can't do that unless your team is able to shoulder the everyday and kind of take those futuristic or more strategic steps. And I'm just lucky that I have a lot of experienced, really talented people on the team. It's, I say it's an embarrassment of riches in many ways.
Not all people are that lucky, and that's that's a good point. Do you incorporate like gratitude, recognition, things like that into the day-to-day for not just the people you work with directly, but with all the way down to the brand new employee?
Yeah. So I think that's one of the areas that we could continue to do better, but we certainly do have a number of ways to recognize people. We, for example, have a tool within our platform that's called shout-outs that allows people to give kind of on-the-fly feedback. We do a lot of town halls where we recognize performance. So just this week, I sat in the sales town hall where they recognized all the top performing sellers for the month. We definitely give shout outs to our new employees. We focus a lot on onboarding training and performance and onboarding training. And so, I think we've got to morph some of our practices, because we used to bring everyone together to celebrate anniversaries, birthdays, and promotions. We would do like a quarterly little celebration, like a happy hour. And, that's not something we can do anymore in an easy fashion. So how do you, again, make those things meaningful and equip managers to really take care of people in those moments? We also try and push incentives to people. So this week we've been working on an incentive for our frontline associates who have really, carried a lot of the client interaction conversations during a really difficult year end for many companies, as it relates to, their pandemic recovery, their taxes, their W-2s for associates. And so we also try and put, dollars behind what we do too. But, to go back to your notion of humor, I think that's one of the things that's really important about Paycor. We have 6 guiding principles, and the 6th one is have fun along the way. And it's a real reminder to everyone that, we work hard, we play hard, but we also celebrate, and we have those human connections that allow us to have lighthearted moments and to poke fun at each other in the right kind of ways, and to have those team rituals. And it's a big part of our culture, that notion of fun. And fun, a lot of the fun comes in that humor and just informal connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And making those connect, not only with one another, but humor allows us to connect where we are with where we want to go in new and exciting ways. And it sounds like, you're through your culture and through the things that you're doing and recognition and, these new ideas like homerooms, like you're constantly moving. It doesn't sound like there's any stagnation or just committing to a new normal. I hate that term because I'm one that's like, shake things up every day. Why do we want normal? Why not constantly be, looking to try new things and to improve the normal every day? And so it sounds like that's part of your mission.
I think we never know exactly what we're capable of, right? So every year when we set our goals for the year, we have something we call a strategy on a page or a SOAP. And we do it at the function level for the people team. So we're comprised of both the HR and the learning functions. And every year when we set our goals, we think, oh, this is too much. We've got 10 pounds in a 5-pound sack. And, we've been too ambitious or too aggressive. And every year we find a way. We find a way to knock out all of the initiatives that we've signed up for and then some, because business always throws you curves, right? You have an acquisition or you have, a transaction in the business that requires you to kind of pivot some of your resources, or, you go completely virtual, or you decide to move your onboarding programs from 12 weeks to 4 weeks, whatever it might be. I think we don't allow ourselves to have the limitations. We really push to say, what can we do? And our track record is such that we know that, we're aspirational. We're going to push a little harder, work a little harder, and figure out how to make it come alive. And in the beginning, we're always, looking at the buffet like, oh, I'll never be able to eat all that. I'll never be able to eat everything on my plate. And then we do. We figure it out.
Right. The old adage about how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah. I think that the best opportunity for change is to invite the people in who are closest to the work, because it's easy to be resistant to change and easy to say no to change, but when you engage people at the front lines and give them a voice and help them understand that tomorrow is going to be better than today and that they have a say in it, it really makes change a lot more palatable because it becomes their idea. And so I think a lot of times we conceive major changes in the back room, and then we meet resistance when it comes to implementing them on the front line. And so when you really have a healthy grassroots voice in your workforce, it makes change that much more, you're that much more able to consume change and or conceive change, because it's involving the very people that will ultimately be most affected.
That's advice anybody can take. I mean, like I said, the organization I'm working with, like that's what I want to communicate with them, and so I'm working to do that. So this is very timely.
I'm super proud of Paycor as an organization, and we've always tried to put people first, because we know that when you have really happy employees, not even happy, because happy is sometimes a fleeting thing, right? But when you have really engaged employees, even if they're engaged in fixing something that's not right or to their liking, they're still using their voice, right? And it's when you lose the voice that you have a problem. And so, I think we've always encouraged healthy grassroots and, healthy exchange of opinions, even when they're differing from what we desire or want as a business. It engages people.
Right. Nobody likes an echo chamber.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it.
Right. If everybody's saying the same thing, there's no growth, you can't learn anything new. And, we all agree with one another, but that's only going to take us so far, eventually into conflict. All right. Well, Karen, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I hope you got to where you're going or are getting to where you're going safely.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, David. And I, stay in touch. Like, I'd love to see a clip of something you've done for SHRM or how you engage the organization. We're always looking for, partnerships to help us do something different and bring something different into the way we message employees. So, yeah, if there's something that would help me and my team understand what you do best, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And likewise, I'm actually going into a meeting right from here. I'm working with a PR firm to put together a stand-up comedy training program where, we teach you the skill, not necessarily to do stand-up comedy, but the skills that a comic uses to be successful at their job are the same that a leader uses to successfully connect and engage their team. So
That's really cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
one of my favorite things a long time ago, Paycor used to have these, we still do them, they're just a little different. We would have these quarterly employee meetings, and one of them was always an improv.
Mm.
And it was hilarious. Like, the people that did it were so talented and just like on the fly. We had one where they did this whole rap about Paycor and payrolling and stuff. And I mean, just the creative energy that it sparks for people. I miss those days when we used to do that. It was like always a good time because it did create this like energy. So, well, thank you,
Absolutely.
David. I hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend.
Hey, you do the same. I am working on it.
All right. See you later.
Yeah, take care.
You can't laugh at that.
Special thanks to Karen Crone for joining us on this episode of You Can't Laugh at Work and sharing her valuable insights. To learn a little bit more about Paycor, visit paycor.com. If you want to learn a little bit more about Karen, she contributes regularly to Forbes, and you can find her on Twitter and LinkedIn, of course. On Twitter at KLCrone, CRONE, for more leadership insights and ideas. Thank you for listening to this episode of You Can't Laugh at Work. As we continue on our mission to incorporate humor into leadership in more workplaces, to engage more people, to inspire creativity and collaboration and caring, feel free to give us a like, a follow, a subscribe on whatever platform that you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, throw us a 5-star rating and a review of the way that you found these episodes to be helpful. Because we want to prove that no matter how quickly change comes, no matter how uncertain the future is, no matter if your people are working from home and you're trying to find new ways to engage them remotely, remember that there is always a way to laugh at work.